When you're ready.
When you hear a piece of music, do you ever associate it with a color? Humans tend to have an emotional association between different senses. Examples could be feeling a soft, warm, fuzzy blanket and associating it with the color orange or red. This is called cross-moral correspondence, which refers to the consistent association between two sensory fields, according to Whitford et al. I will look at cross-moral correspondence for this study, specifically regarding music and color. In other words, hearing different pieces of music and associating them with various colors and shades. According to a study done by Palmer et al., the link between these two senses is often connected by emotional mediation, using emotions to justify why individuals associate different music, pieces, and colors together. Additionally, it's been found that personality traits of tested individuals who are looking into cross-moral correspondence. Additionally, it can be found that personality traits of the tested individuals influence the cross-moral correspondence that is made. So for this research project, I will be investigating the question of how do the different personality types of high school students affect their cross-moral correlation between color and music. So the studies tend to use a rich type of vocabulary that isn't typically known among the common individual, including words like cross-moral correspondence, synesthesia, and sensory processing. So as previously mentioned, cross-moral correspondence mean the consistent emotional association between features of two different sensory fields. Synesthesia is defined by a study on the neurophysiology of synesthesia, which states, synesthesia is an experience in which the stimulation of one sensory or cognitive stem leads to the association of a separate and second unstimulated stem. It is a condition different from cross-moral correspondence, and only a small amount of the population tend to be affected by it. Sensory processing is the organization of sensory information from the body and the external world that allows a person to interact effectively with their physical and social environment, according to Steen et al. According to ScienceDirect.com, from birth, sensory processing influences an infant's actions and through their reflective motor actions and state regulation. This means that sensory processing is a quality individuals have since they were an infant that allows them to process and react to their senses. Finally, the emotional mediation hypothesis is defined by a hypothesis that believes color and music are linked through shared emotional associations, according to Palmer et al. These are all key terms to understanding the topic that is being researched and future experiments. So for my literature review that I did prior to conducting the experiment, there were several studies that kind of dove somewhat into what I then tended to veer towards my research that I used kind of to understand the topic further. So to understand how different personality types of high school students affected their cross-modal association of color and music, it's first essential to understand the research that has already been done about it. And many studies have looked specifically at emotional association between music and color. And a key study that I looked at during my research was called Color, Music, and Emotion, Back to the Blues, or Back to the Blues. And it examined the cross-modal correspondence between color and music and what emotional associations that music qualities have that they correlate to color characteristics. And so the results that were found from these 34 individuals that were tested with hearing a different piece of music and then indicating what color they associated for them showed that there were consistent emotional associations between the music samples and the colors that they indicated. And these connections were often based on emotional associations between the two, such as loud, heavy music was often indicated with a deeper red color, and the connection was explained by their similar emotional qualities such as arousal or valence, and that was used to describe the music to color correlations that they found. Secondly, a similar study was done by Palmer et al. That examined how cross-modal association and emotional association connected music and color, and they specifically found that scale and speed, as well as like major and minor, significantly associated the music samples with the colors that were indicated. For example, a sample that was in the major scale was often associated with, or was often heard as faster, and then that was associated with more of a light color such as yellow. And conversely, the minor scale music that was played, which had a slower pace, was correlated with more darker colors. Specifically, they found a lot of blue shades. And additionally, they tested how individuals emotionally rated these colors in terms of like happy versus sad. And the color and music ratings very closely correlated, and this provided confirmation that their theory of emotional mediation hypothesis, showing how color and music closely related based on their shared emotional content. And the other part of my research question was how personality traits kind of tie into this, and it has been studied that it specifically ties into how personality traits perceive different types of music. And so at the Istanbul University in Turkey, they conducted a study on how the mood, gender, and musical preferences of introverted people versus extroverted people varied. And the study concluded that women tended to favor more mellow music, yet men gravitated towards more intense music. Additionally, they found that extroverted people preferred rhythmic music, such as pop or like an electric dance style. Conversely, introverted people were more likely to choose an intense music that was more contemporary and energetic. And the study proved to them that there is a connection between personality type and how that affects their musical preferences. Similarly, a study was done by the Pujanani University in India, and that examined how different personality types, specifically introverts, extroverts, and neurotics, preferred other types of music. And it was found that extroverts similarly prefer more of an upbeat, happy type of music, where introverts preferred energetic, rhythmic, and tender music. And finally, neurotics preferred intense, rebellious, and sad music, and they used their findings to suggest that musical preferences can tell what their personality type might be and that they correlate. So the method that I used to conduct my research was a lot based off of the different literature pieces that I evaluated and what I thought would be best to kind of look into what I wanted to. And so to conduct my findings of what different colors high school students of various personality types associated with different types of music, I used 15 high school participants of all various ages and genders, and these participants signed a permission slip in order to be evaluated, and participation was completely voluntary and ethical standards were upheld. I randomly sampled different common spaces in my high school to try to keep a random assortment of high school students that were then went on to participate in the study. No one was turned down from participating. Everyone who wanted to was able to, which tried to keep the participants as random and reflectionary of the population as possible. I also used 2 different tests and different pieces of equipment. I used the Myers-Briggs personality test to test what the personality type of the participants were, and they were after taking the test were given 1 out of the 16 options by the online test. And I used this one because it was the most accessible and detailed online that I could find. I also used a Google form that the participants indicated their results on, and I used this again because it was the most effective and accessible online. For the music samples I used various YouTube clips that I could find of classical music that had various characteristic scales and had a wide variety of what was supposed to inflict different emotions and colors, and again use this because it was free and accessible online. And I also, the color options that participants had to indicate what musical pieces they associated with was called the Berkeley 37 Color Project, and it was, a picture of it will come later. But it is a grid that was conducted by the same Bach to the Blues study, and that's how I and it worked well for them and the Palmer et al. Study, so I thought it would be similar, or work good for a similar study that I was doing. The various music samples I used 9 different ones, all classical music with various characteristics such as major minor scale, fast or slow tempo, and different musical instrumental solo pieces. And in doing my research, it's largely based off of the Back to the Blue study that was done in 2018, because their method and procedure seemed very similar to what I wanted to do in terms of correlating the music with color, and then I tied in personality because I was trying to make that additional correlation as well. But most of my procedure in terms of the music and color is based off of their findings, like in terms of different major and minor pieces, scales, fast tempos, that type of thing, as well as the color, Berkeley 37 color shade options that they had. So in selecting my participants and volunteers from my high school, they were asked, and my procedure was to get a permission slip signed by a legal guardian, and then after they were ready to go with the experiment, I sent them the Myers-Briggs personality test to take, and then they opened up a Google form and indicated what their personality type was, and then I played each track one by one for the 30-second clip that was selected, and then they had time to indicate for each individual track what color of the Berkeley 37 options they associated with that music track, and I did that for all 9 tracks and recorded their results. So for results and analysis, this is my own interpretation of how the participants of each personality type responded and the various 2-scale shades and colors that they indicated. And for my results and analysis, I'll go through some visuals and the letters and numbers in the colored boxes are just for my own understanding and don't have any implications on the results or analysis. But so when I look broadly at how all of the participants answered in terms of each musical track, I looked specifically at all of them regardless of personality type first to see if there was any correlation amongst all of them that didn't seem to be specific to personality type. And one of these was track 3. Almost all the participants indicated a light shade of the colors that were available, because on the color wheel color options there was saturated, muted, dark, and light. And for track 3 it was almost all light colors, and this can make sense because it had more of a fast tempo or light nature, and regardless of personality type it seemed to be associated with that. For track 4, this was similar in terms of everyone, or more than 75% of participants saw this as red, most likely because the track was in a minor scale and had a fast tempo and more intense sounding, and typically that would be associated societally with the color red. Track 8 was majority blue and gray indicated regardless of personality type throughout the board. That was what was indicated, and it had a slower tempo, which could be associated with more somber sounding music that would typically be associated with people by being sad, hence the gray and blue that was indicated. And track 9 was it had more minor scale, fast tempo, and there wasn't a specific color, but almost all of the colors that were indicated were either dark or saturated, which can tell that people associated it with being more intense than anything. And when I look at personality type specific, 1 and 6 didn't have much correlation anywhere based on personality type or looking broadly at a whole. Individuals seem to have their own association with what these tracks correlated as. And track 2, typically extroverts seem to associate it with more warmer colors, and specifically the ENTJ and ENFP associated them similarly, which I'm not sure as to the reasoning why, but these two specific personality traits, everyone that was of that personality trait, they indicated the same color, and introverts didn't seem to indicate a specific color at all. For track 3, extroverts seem to associate these colors with more variability, where introverts had more, almost all lighter colors that they associated with them. It could be believed that the fast tempo of this musical piece had more societal correlation of lightness or light movement, which why the participants could have indicated more lighter colors. Track 4, like I said, is almost all red because of the minor scale and fast-paced, and societally that would be more associated with the color red and less personality type driven. For track 5, introverts tend to associate it with lighter colors, and it was similar to track 2, where introverts thought it was more of a lighter color and extroverts is more across the board. However, different than track 2, this was a slower tempo and more of a fast-paced song, which was different from the last one. For track 7, it was nearly all saturated colors, but there was no clear personality type drive to it, which the musical piece just seemed to be more associated individually rather than by a trend. Track 8, like I said, was blue and green altogether, but introverts tended to veer more gray and extroverts more blue. The two could have been correlating them differently based on how they viewed it, but that is a trend that was seen slightly. And track 9, extroverts seem to see more dark, saturated colors such as red and black. People who had the personality type, 2 first letters of EN, thought more red and ES black, and introverts didn't seem to have a specific pattern, which I'm not sure why, but that is a trend that was seen. So for my analysis, I think there could be a potential correlation. However, I believe that the societal association of how people as a whole rather than individual personality types associate music is more prevalent. How, for example, when I looked at the broad view, there were a few tracks that everyone, regardless of their personality type, seemed to associate with a specific color. I also think it's hard because I had such a small scale of research of participants that participated that could have skewed how that could have skewed my results. I think in a bigger lab with more resources and more participants and a better source of people, that a trend could be more prevalently seen rather than what I saw with the 15 people that I evaluated. And so my kind of so what in conclusion and why this matters, I think it matters because I think kind of emotions and how we correlate things and react is very prevalent in society and how people communicate, and I think it can have implications in education, marketing, and just overall more understanding of how people think, because if you understand maybe specifically how someone is going to react to different emotional stimuli, we can help better understand them and maybe tailor things if we want them to react in a certain way. And I hope going forward that this is continued to be studied, because I think there could be something there. Just for my own personal research, I don't think I had a large enough scale of participants to be able to see as clear of trends, but I did see a few.
All right, some questions. Thanks. How did the choices that you made when you were designing or implementing your method impact your process?
I would say when I was trying to find participants and I was trying to find a wide variety of people, different ages, genders, just from different classes essentially, that was definitely hard because that took a long time and I ended up not even getting as many as I wanted. So I would say that was one of the hardest things, because then that put my process further and further behind, and then I found at the end with my analysis and going over my data, I had less time to do so because I spent so much time on my method and trying to find as many people and different people as possible. So then that kind of hindered my process later on and how much time I could spend on results and analysis.
Okay, thank you. How does your new understanding address the gap in the scholarly conversation?
I think that I did see trends, but I didn't have enough participants to see a trend that is like defendable and very, like, no doubt there's clearly a correlation. I think that Back to the Blues study by Whitman and all that I found, they clearly found an emotional association between color and music. They had a much wider variety and group of people that they were testing. So I think I did see trends, and I think that there could be potential some personality correlations. Like I did see specifically introverts versus extroverts, there were differences, but I personally thought societally with the group of people I had, that was more of a trend, but I wouldn't shut it down and say that there isn't potential implications there and that it could be further looked at in the future from the few trends that I did see.
Okay. What was the most important research skill you developed as a result of the process, and how are you going to apply that to your future?
I would say the most important research skill during my lit review, specifically when I was going through the various studies and kind of trying to read and understand how they went about them, I found, like, maybe before I would have looked at like the abstract and the conclusion only, but I found it very beneficial to read through their method and how they did things and really look at their visuals that they offer during their or on their write-ups and what's available online, and that can really help shaped my understanding of how people do things and why. And I think for further research projects that I potentially do in college, looking at that can even help myself understand how to better set up my own research projects and understand why they're set up that way.
Okay, thank you.